Jake Morrison had been flying cargo ships through space for almost 10 years now. He was 32 years old and enjoyed the quiet life of moving supplies between Earth's space stations and the moon bases. Most people found space lonely, but Jake liked it that way. He did not have to deal with complicated relationships or difficult people. Just him, his ship, and the endless stars. On a regular Tuesday morning, Jake was flying his usual route to the outer orbital platform. His ship was old but reliable, and he knew every sound it made. He was drinking coffee from a metal cup and watching the scanners when something unusual appeared on his screen. There was an energy reading near an old communications satellite that nobody used anymore. The reading did not match anything Jake had seen before. He should have reported it to the space traffic control and moved on with his delivery. That was the rule. But Jake had always been curious, and 10 years of the same routes had made him a bit bored. He changed course and headed toward the strange signal. As he got closer, his ship's lights caught something floating in the debris field. It was a small pod, badly damaged with designs and symbols he did not recognize. It was clearly not human-made. Jake's heart started beating faster. He had heard stories about alien ships, but Earth had only made contact with a few species, and those meetings had been formal and distant. This was different. This was real and right in front of him. He moved his ship closer and used the external cameras to get a better look. Through the pod's small window, he could see movement inside. Someone was alive in there. He ran a quick scan and felt his stomach drop. The pod's life support was failing. Whoever was inside had maybe 20 minutes of air left, probably less. Jake did not think. He just acted. He positioned his cargo ship next to the pod and used the magnetic grappler to pull it into his cargo bay. The whole process took 8 minutes, and his hands were shaking the entire time. Once the pod was secure inside his ship, Jake put on his emergency suit and went into the cargo bay. The pod was small, maybe the size of a car, and covered in blast marks. Someone had shot at it. He found the emergency release and opened the hatch. What he saw inside made him freeze. 2 young girls lay inside, unconscious and barely breathing. But they were not human girls. Their skin was a pale blue color that seemed to glow faintly. Their hair was long and white, almost silver. They had large eyes, closed now, and delicate features that looked almost human but clearly were not. They were thin, too thin, like they had not eaten in a very long time. The younger one looked about 8 years old and the older one maybe 10, if Jake had to guess by human standards. The older girl's eyes opened slightly. She looked at Jake with fear and confusion. She tried to say something, but her voice was so weak he could barely hear it. His translator device picked up fragments of words but could not make sense of the language. Jake held up his hands to show he meant no harm. He pointed to himself and said his name slowly. Then he pointed to his ship and made a gesture of safety. The girl seemed to understand a little. Her eyes closed again and she went limp. Jake knew he had to move fast. He carefully lifted both girls out of the pod. They were surprisingly light, their bodies frail from starvation and dehydration. He carried them to his ship's small medical bay, which was really just a room with a basic medical synthesizer and a scanner. He laid them on the 2 fold-out beds and started running diagnostics. The scanner gave him readings, but half of them made no sense. Their biology was similar to humans, but different in important ways. Their blood was different. Their organs were arranged differently. He had no idea what they could eat or what might poison them. He felt completely out of his depth, but he could not just let them die. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He did not call the authorities. He did not report finding alien children in a damaged escape pod. He knew what would happen if he did. The military would take them. Scientists would study them. They would be poked and tested and questioned. These children, already terrified and hurt, would become specimens. Jake could not do that to them. Instead, he set course for his private hangar on Luna 7. It was a small facility on the far side of the moon where independent pilots kept their ships. It was remote and people there minded their own business. He could take care of the girls there without anyone asking too many questions. The flight to Luna 7 took 6 hours. During that time, Jake did everything he could think of to help them. He started with the basics. The medical synthesizer could create simple nutrient solutions, so he made something as close to universal as possible, just sugar water and basic minerals. He managed to get some liquid into the older girl's mouth using a dropper. She swallowed weakly, which was a good sign. The younger one was harder. She was completely unconscious and would not swallow, Jake had to use a feeding tube, something he had only read about in emergency manuals. He monitored their vital signs constantly. Their hearts were beating too slowly. Their breathing was shallow. The older girl had burns on her arms and legs, probably from whatever had damaged their pod. Jake treated the burns with synthetic skin from the medical kit. He adjusted the room temperature several times, trying to find what was comfortable for them. He watched their skin color, which seemed to get a bit brighter when he made the room cooler. When Jake finally reached Luna 7 and got them into his small living quarters, the girls were still alive, but barely. He had saved them from dying in space, but now came the harder part. He had to figure out how to keep them alive and help them recover. He had no training for this. He was just a cargo pilot who had made an impulsive decision. That first night, Jake did not sleep. He sat between the two beds he had set up in his main room, watching the girls breathe, checking their pulse every few minutes, adjusting blankets, and wondering what he had gotten himself into. The older girl stirred once and opened her eyes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, despite everything she had been through, despite being on an alien ship with a strange creature caring for her, she did something that made Jake's decision feel right. She gave him a small, weak smile before closing her eyes again. Jake knew in that moment that he would do whatever it took to save them. He did not care about rules or consequences. These were children who needed help, and he was going to give it to them. The first week was the hardest time Jake had ever experienced in his life. The two alien girls were barely clinging to survival, and he had no real knowledge of how to help them properly. He spent every waking hour trying different things, hoping something would work. He used the medical synthesizer to create different nutrient mixtures, starting with simple glucose solutions and slowly adding proteins and minerals in tiny amounts. Each time he gave them something new, he watched carefully for any bad reactions. The older girl was stronger and started responding first. By the third day, she could keep her eyes open for longer periods. She watched Jake with curiosity mixed with caution. He learned that she was trying to understand him just as much as he was trying to understand her. Jake talked to her constantly, even though she could not understand his words. He figured that hearing a calm, friendly voice would help her feel safe. He told her about his life, about Earth, about how he found them. He had no idea if any of it made sense to her, but she seemed to listen. The younger girl took longer to wake up. Jake worried about her constantly. She was so small and fragile. On the fifth day, her eyes finally opened. She looked around in confusion and fear, then saw her sister and reached out weakly. The older girl took her hand and said something in their musical language. Jake felt relieved seeing them together and conscious at the same time. By the end of the second week, both girls could sit up and take food on their own. Jake had discovered that they could eat many human foods, though they preferred things that were plant-based and slightly sweet. They drank water eagerly and their skin started glowing brighter, which Jake learned meant they were getting healthier. The burns on the older girl's arms healed remarkably fast, leaving no scars. Jake started teaching them basic English using pictures and simple words. He would point to objects and say their names. The girls were incredibly smart and picked up language faster than he thought possible. Within a month, the older girl could speak in simple sentences. She told him her name was Sienna and her younger sister was Lyra. She explained with limited words and many hand gestures that their ship had been attacked. Bad people had killed their family. They had escaped in the pod but had been floating in space for a very long time. Jake felt his heart break for them. These children had lost everything. He promised them, even though Sienna could barely understand all his words, that they were safe now. He would take care of them. Sienna translated for Lyra, and both girls looked at him with such trust and gratitude that Jake knew he could never let them down. As weeks turned into months, the girls became stronger and more comfortable. They explored Jake's small living quarters with endless curiosity. Everything human fascinated them. They loved watching old movies on his computer screen. They laughed at cartoons even when they did not fully understand the jokes. Lyra was especially drawn to music and would sit for hours listening to every type of song Jake could find. Jake realized he could not keep them hidden forever in his quarters on Luna 7. They needed more space, more stimulation, more of a normal life. He made modifications to his living area, creating a proper bedroom for them with 2 beds. He bought educational materials and enrolled them in remote learning programs under false identities. claiming they were his adopted daughters from a distant colony. The registration officials barely checked his story. In the outer colonies, people did not ask too many questions. Sienna showed an incredible talent for math and science. She would watch Jake repair his ship and ask endless questions about how everything worked. By the time she had been with Jake for a year, she could help him with basic repairs. Lyra was different. She was artistic and emotional. She seemed to sense what Jake was feeling even before he knew it himself. If he had a bad day, she would quietly sit next to him and hold his hand. If he was happy, her whole face would light up with joy. Jake taught them about human culture and holidays. Their first Earth Christmas was chaotic and wonderful. Jake had no idea how to properly celebrate, but he bought a small artificial tree and some decorations. The girls were amazed by the lights and spent hours just staring at them. Jake gave them simple gifts, warm clothes and books and art supplies. They gave him drawings they had made, pictures of the three of them together as a family. Jake hung those drawings on every wall. They created their own traditions too. Every Sunday morning, Jake would make pancakes. He was terrible at cooking, and the pancakes were always burnt or lumpy. But the girls loved them anyway, or at least they pretended to. They would sit around the small table, eating awful pancakes and laughing about their week. It became their special time together. As the girls grew older, Jake learned more about their species and culture. Etherians, as they called themselves, matured slowly compared to humans. What looked like a 10-year-old human child might be a 5-year-old Etherian. They would not reach full maturity until their early 20s. This meant Jake had many years ahead of him as their guardian and protector. He also learned that Sienna and Lyra were not ordinary Etherian children. They came from a noble family, possibly even royalty. Their father had been an important ambassador, and their mother had been a military commander. The attack on their ship had been political, an assassination meant to end their family line. The girls were the only survivors. Jake worried about this information. If the Etherian Empire ever found out that their princesses were alive and living with a human cargo pilot on the moon, what would happen? Would they be grateful or angry? Would they take the girls away from him? He decided not to think too much about it. For now, Sienna and Lyra were safe and happy. That was all that mattered. Years passed in a comfortable rhythm. Jake continued his cargo runs, but he made sure to spend most of his time with the girls. He taught them to ride bikes in the low lunar gravity, which resulted in many crashes and much laughter. He showed them how to play card games and chess. They taught him meditation techniques from their culture and showed him how to see ultraviolet light patterns that humans normally could not perceive. The girls helped him too. Sienna became so skilled with technology that she started improving his ship's systems. She increased his engine efficiency by 15%. And upgraded his navigation computer with techniques from Etherian science. Lyra helped him understand people better. Her empathic abilities let her sense when someone was lying or trying to cheat Jake in business deals. They became a team. But as the girls approached their 20th year with Jake, things started changing. They were no longer children. Sienna had grown into a confident young woman with brilliant ideas and strong opinions. Lyra had become graceful and intuitive, with abilities that marked her as special even among her own kind. They started exhibiting powers that Jake had not seen before. Sienna could manipulate electromagnetic fields with her thoughts. Lyra could sense emotions from miles away. One evening, Sienna approached Jake with a serious expression. She held a small device she had built, a translator more advanced than anything human technology could create. She asked Jake to sit down because she needed to tell him something important. Lyra sat on his other side, holding his hand. Sienna explained that they needed to return to Etherian space. Their people needed them. The political situation had not improved, and without the royal family, the empire was falling into chaos. But more than that, they had responsibilities to their bloodline and their culture. They could not hide on the moon forever, no matter how much they loved their life with Jake. Jake felt like his world was ending, but he understood. He had always known this day might come. He told them he would support whatever they decided. But then Sienna said something that shocked him. In Etherian culture, the person who saved and raised a noble child became bonded to that family forever. It was a sacred connection. They would return to their people, but they would come back for him. They promised. And when they returned, they would ask him to join them officially, not just as a guardian, but as their bonded partner. In Etherian terms, as their husband. Jake sat in stunned silence after Sienna finished explaining their proposal. Marriage was not a word he had expected to hear. He had raised these girls from children. He had bandaged their wounds and made them terrible pancakes and taught them to ride bikes. The idea of them as anything other than his daughters felt strange and confusing. But Sienna patiently explained that Etherian culture was different from human culture. They did not see him as a father figure anymore. They had grown up. Their feelings had changed and deepened into something else entirely. Lyra spoke up for the first time in the conversation. She told Jake that they understood this was difficult for him to accept. She knew he still saw them as the scared little girls he had rescued. But they were adults now by Etherian standards. They had spent years thinking about this. Their gratitude had grown into genuine love and respect. They wanted him as their partner, their equal, not their parent. In Etherian society, this kind of bond was the highest honor they could offer anyone. Jake asked them to give him time to think. He needed them to be absolutely sure this was what they wanted. He suggested they return to their people first, experience their own culture again, and see if they still felt the same way after being away from him. Sienna and Lyra agreed but made him promise to wait for them. They would return in exactly 2 years, when they reached full maturity at 22 Earth years of age. If he still wanted them, they would complete the bonding ceremony. If he decided he could not accept their proposal, they would respect his choice, but they would always consider him family. 3 weeks later, an Etherian rescue ship arrived at the edge of human space. Sienna had sent out a coded message that only loyal members of their family's faction would recognize. The ship was small and fast, designed to avoid detection by their enemies. Jake watched as the girls packed their few belongings. They did not have much. Everything they owned fit into 2 small bags. Their whole life with him had been simple and modest, and they seemed grateful for that now. The goodbye at the docking port was one of the hardest moments of Jake's life. Sienna hugged him tightly and whispered that she would miss him every single day. Lyra cried, something Etherians rarely did, and told him that no matter what happened, he had given them the most precious gift anyone could give. He had given them a childhood filled with love and safety. Jake watched their ship disappear into the darkness of space and felt more alone than he had ever felt in his entire life. The days after their departure were extremely difficult. Jake tried to return to his normal routine, flying cargo routes and making deliveries, but his small quarters on Luna 7 felt empty and quiet. He would wake up expecting to hear Sienna tinkering with some device or Lyra humming a melody. Instead, there was only silence. He stopped making pancakes on Sunday mornings because it hurt too much to sit at the table alone. His old friend Patricia Hayes was the only person who knew the full truth about the girls. Jake had served with her years ago before he became a civilian pilot. Patricia was now a lieutenant commander in Earth's defense fleet, stationed on the orbital platform Guardian 3. She had always been trustworthy and understanding. When Jake told her everything about Sienna and Lyra, including their marriage proposal, Patricia listened without judgment. She visited Jake on Luna 7 a month after the girls left. She found him going through his daily routine like a robot, just existing but not really living. Patricia sat him down and told him directly that he needed to decide what he really wanted. Did he love Sienna and Lyra as daughters, or had his feelings changed too? Was he holding back because of human social norms, or because he genuinely did not feel romantic love for them? Jake admitted he did not know. He was confused and scared of making the wrong choice. Patricia told him that he had 2 years to figure it out. She suggested he use that time to learn more about Etherian culture and to search his own heart honestly. She also warned him that if the girls returned as promised, Earth would face an unprecedented diplomatic situation. 2 alien princesses coming to marry a human cargo pilot would attract attention from governments, military organizations, and media across the planet. Jake needed to be prepared for that. The weeks turned into months, and Jake slowly adjusted to life without the girls. He started receiving encrypted messages from them every few weeks. The messages were always brief but filled with warmth. Sienna told him about returning to Etherian space and being recognized as a princess. Their people had believed them dead for over 20 years. Their survival was considered a miracle. Lyra described the incredible technology and beautiful worlds of their empire, but both always ended their messages the same way. They missed him. They were counting the days until they could return. Jake learned that Sienna and Lyra were not just any princesses. They were heirs to something called the Third Crown, one of the highest positions in Etherian government. Their return had sparked hope among their people, but also anger among their enemies. The faction that had killed their parents was still active and still trying to seize power. The girls were walking into a dangerous political situation. Around the 1-year mark, Jake received a message that worried him deeply. Sienna wrote that there had been an assassination attempt. Someone had tried to poison them at a formal dinner. They had survived because Lyra's empathic abilities sensed the murderous intent of a servant before they ate the food. Security had been increased, but the message made Jake realize how much danger they were in. He felt helpless being so far away, unable to protect them. He started researching everything he could find about Etherians. He contacted xenologists and historians who had studied First Contact. He learned that Etherian nobles never broke their promises. If Sienna and Lyra said they would return, they would do everything in their power to keep that promise. He also learned that Etherian bonding ceremonies created a real neural link between partners. They would literally be able to sense each other's emotions across any distance. The idea both fascinated and frightened him. Jake also did a lot of thinking about his own feelings. He forced himself to be honest. When he thought about Sienna, he felt pride in her intelligence and strength. When he thought about Lyra, he felt warmth from her kindness and artistic soul. But was that love or paternal affection? He spent many sleepless nights wrestling with this question. Slowly, he began to realize that his feelings had changed over the years too. He had not noticed it happening, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing children and started seeing remarkable women who challenged him and inspired him. As the 2-year mark approached, Jake received a message that changed everything. Sienna's voice came through tense and urgent. They were coming back as promised, but they were being pursued. The rival faction had made another attempt on their lives, a major attack that had nearly succeeded. They were fleeing Etherian space with a small fleet of loyal ships. They would arrive at Earth's solar system in 3 weeks. She asked Jake to prepare for their arrival and to trust that everything would work out. Jake immediately contacted Patricia. He told her everything about the incoming fleet and the dangerous situation. Patricia made a decision that showed why Jake had always trusted her. She would ensure that Earth's defense systems did not fire on the Etherian ships. She would personally escort them through human space. But she warned Jake that this would create a massive diplomatic incident. Earth's first real contact with the Galactic Empire was about to happen because a cargo pilot had saved 2 children 22 years ago. The final 3 weeks were the longest of Jake's life. He prepared himself mentally and emotionally for what was coming. He bought new clothes that would be appropriate for meeting royalty. He cleaned his quarters until everything was spotless. He practiced what he would say to Sienna and Lyra when he saw them again. But mostly he thought about his answer to their proposal. By the time their fleet appeared on long-range sensors, Jake had made his decision. The Etherian fleet was magnificent. 36 ships of stunning design filled Earth's orbital space, their hulls shimmering with advanced technology. At the center was a flagship that looked like a palace floating among the stars. Earth's defense fleet surrounded them cautiously, but Patricia's ship led them safely toward the diplomatic station. Jake stood on the observation deck of Guardian 3, watching the ships approach and knowing that his simple, quiet life was about to end forever. Patricia's communication system came alive with a voice Jake had not heard in 2 years. Sienna spoke with confidence and authority, but he could still hear the warmth underneath. She identified herself as Princess Sienna of the Third Crown and requested permission to meet with citizen Jake Morrison. She stated clearly that they had a promise to keep. Jake felt his heart pounding as he realized the moment had finally arrived. The girls had kept their word. They had come back for him. Now he had to decide if he was brave enough to accept everything that came with that choice. The meeting was arranged on Unity 1, the newest diplomatic station that humanity had built specifically for interactions with alien species. Jake had never been to such an important facility before. Everything was clean and modern and designed to impress. He felt completely out of place in his simple suit, surrounded by government officials and military personnel in their formal uniforms. Patricia stayed close to him, offering quiet support and reassurance. She reminded him that he was not here as a nobody. He was the man who had saved 2 princesses and raised them for 20 years. That meant something important. Jake's hands were shaking as he waited in the diplomatic chamber. The room was large and circular with huge windows showing the stars outside. Representatives from Earth's government sat on one side. The Etherian delegation would enter from the opposite door. Jake stood in the middle, feeling like he was about to face the most important moment of his life. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He wondered if Sienna and Lyra would look different after 2 years. He wondered if they had changed their minds about him. The doors opened and the Etherian delegation entered. Jake saw several tall figures in elegant robes, advisors and guards by the look of them. But his eyes were drawn immediately to the 2 women in the center. Sienna and Lyra had indeed changed. They were no longer the young women who had left 2 years ago. They had fully matured into their roles as royalty. Sienna moved with the confidence of a leader, her silver blue skin marked with glowing patterns that Jake had never seen before. Lyra walked beside her with incredible grace, her presence radiating a calm warmth that filled the entire room. But when their eyes met Jake's eyes, all the ceremony and formality disappeared for a moment. Sienna's face broke into a huge smile, the same smile she had given him when she was a child. Lyra's eyes filled with tears of joy. They moved toward him, and despite all the important people watching, despite the cameras recording everything, they embraced him as tightly as they ever had. Jake felt his own tears running down his face. He had missed them so much. For those few seconds, they were not princesses and a cargo pilot. They were just a family reunited after too long apart. Sienna whispered in his ear that she had kept her promise. Lyra held his hand and told him it was so good to see him again. Jake could not find words. He just held them both and felt grateful that they were safe and alive and here with him. Eventually, they had to separate and return to their formal positions. The diplomatic proceedings needed to continue, but that moment of genuine emotion had set the tone for everything that followed. The formal presentation began with Sienna and Lyra explaining their story to Earth's Council. They spoke about the attack on their family's ship 22 years ago. They described drifting in space for weeks, starving and terrified, waiting to die. They told everyone how Jake had found them, saved them and raised them when he could have easily turned them over to authorities. They explained Etherian culture and the sacred bond that formed between a rescuer and those they saved. Sienna addressed the council directly. She told them that in Etherian law, Jake's actions had created a bond that transcended normal relationships. He had not just saved their lives. He had given them a home, an education, love, and protection for 20 years. That kind of devotion created obligations on both sides. They were obligated to honor him. He was entitled to a place in their family and their society. The highest honor they could offer was a bonding ceremony, what humans would call marriage. Some of the Earth Council members looked uncomfortable with this explanation. One official asked if this was really necessary, or if it was just following old traditions. Lyra responded to this question. She explained that yes, tradition was part of it, but more importantly, this was what they genuinely wanted. They had spent 2 years among their own people. They had met countless Etherian nobles and potential partners. None of them understood Sienna and Lyra the way Jake did. None of them had earned their trust and love the way he had. This was not just duty. This was their honest choice. Another council member asked Jake directly if he wanted this. The whole room turned to look at him. Jake felt the weight of everyone's attention. He thought about everything that had happened. He thought about the scared little girls in the damaged pod. He thought about Sunday morning pancakes and teaching them to ride bikes. He thought about the empty quarters he had lived in for 2 years. He thought about his own feelings, which he had finally become honest about during the long wait. Jake spoke simply and from his heart. He told the council that he had raised Sienna and Lyra as his daughters. He had loved them as children, but they were not children anymore. They had grown into remarkable women who were brave and intelligent and kind. During their absence, he had realized that his feelings had changed too. He respected them. He admired them. And yes, he loved them, not as a father but as someone who wanted to stand beside them as an equal partner. If they still wanted him after everything, then yes, he accepted their proposal. The room erupted in discussion. Some officials were supportive. Others were concerned about the political implications. Earth would be forming an alliance with an alien empire through this marriage. That brought responsibilities and potential dangers. Patricia stood up and addressed the council. She pointed out that Jake was a private citizen. He had the right to make his own choices about his personal life. Earth could benefit from a friendly relationship with the Etherean Empire, or Earth could reject this opportunity and possibly make enemies. The choice seemed obvious to her. After hours of debate, the council finally agreed. They would support Jake's decision and facilitate the bonding ceremony. They would establish formal diplomatic relations with the Etherean Empire. Humanity was about to take a major step into the galactic community, all because one cargo pilot had chosen compassion over protocol 22 years ago. That evening, Jake stood on an observation deck looking at the Etherean flagship. Patricia found him there and asked if he was having second thoughts. Jake admitted he was terrified. He was 54 years old. He had lived a simple, quiet life. Now he was about to marry 2 alien princesses and presumably leave Earth forever. Everything was changing so fast. Patricia reminded him that change was not always bad. She had watched him for 2 years being miserable without Sienna and Lyra. She had seen how his face lit up when he received their messages. She told him that love was not about age or species or social status. It was about finding people who made life worth living. Jake knew she was right. He had been alone for most of his life by choice. But Sienna and Lyra had shown him that family and connection were worth the complications. He was scared of the future, but he was more scared of losing them again. He made his final decision with certainty. He would accept the bonding ceremony. He would leave his old life behind. He would join Sienna and Lyra among the stars and face whatever came next together. The announcement was made the following morning. Jake Morrison, former cargo pilot, would marry Princess Sienna and Princess Lyra of the Etherean Third Crown. The ceremony would take place in 1 week aboard the flagship. Representatives from Earth and dozens of other alien species would attend. It would be the social event of the century. Jake tried not to think about all the attention and just focused on the most important part. He would finally be with Sienna and Lyra again, not as their guardian but as their partner and equal. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and nervous energy. Sienna and Lyra had designed a special suit for Jake that combined human style with Etherean technology. The fabric could adjust to different atmospheric conditions and temperatures, allowing him to survive on various alien worlds. Lyra had woven special threads into it that would shimmer and change color based on his emotions, a traditional Etherean touch that showed his feelings to anyone who could perceive such things. Jake thought it was beautiful, but also slightly embarrassing to wear his heart on his sleeve so literally. The wedding ceremony took place aboard the flagship, Celestial Dawn, in a massive chamber that seemed to be made entirely of crystal and light. Thousands of guests attended in person, while billions more watched through galactic broadcasts. Jake had never imagined that so many beings would care about a cargo pilot getting married. But this was more than just a wedding. It was a historic moment of unity between species and a symbol of hope for the Etherean, people who had believed their princesses dead for so long. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of human and Etherean traditions. Patricia stood beside Jake as his best person, wearing her formal military uniform and looking proud. Etherean nobles in flowing robes filled the chamber, their skin glowing in various colors. Representatives from a dozen other alien species had come to witness this unprecedented union. Jake felt overwhelmed by it all. But then Sienna and Lyra entered the chamber and everything else faded away. They wore gowns that seemed to be made of starlight itself, flowing and shimmering with every movement. Their hair was decorated with crystals that captured and reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at directly but were achingly beautiful. They walked toward Jake together, their faces showing joy and love and certainty. When they reached him and took his hands, Jake felt like the luckiest person in the universe. Sienna spoke her vows first in both English and Etherean. She promised to stand beside Jake through any challenge, to honor the sacrifice he had made for them, and to build a future worthy of the love he had shown them. Lyra's vows were more poetic and emotional. She spoke about souls finding each other across impossible distances, about love that grew from gratitude into something deeper and truer, and about choosing to spend their lives with the one person who had shown them what real kindness meant. Jake's vows were simpler but heartfelt. He promised to protect them always, to respect their culture while sharing his own, and to face whatever the universe brought them as a team. He told them that they had given his life meaning and purpose, and he would spend the rest of his days trying to be worthy of their trust and love. When he finished, he saw tears on Lyra's face and a brilliant smile on Sienna's. The bonding ceremony that followed was unlike anything Jake had experienced. Etherean priests used advanced technology that was almost like magic to create a neural link between the three of them. Jake felt a strange sensation in his mind, like doors opening to rooms he had never known existed. Suddenly he could sense Sienna's thoughts on the edge of his consciousness, her brilliant mind always working on solutions and ideas. He could feel Lyra's emotions like gentle waves, her empathy and artistic soul touching his, and they could sense him too, his steady determination and deep love for them. The bond was complete. They were connected in a way that went beyond physical or emotional. They were truly united. The celebration lasted 3 days. Jake met more alien dignitaries than he could count. He tried foods from worlds he had never heard of. He learned to dance in low gravity, which resulted in several clumsy moments that made everyone laugh, including himself. Patricia attended all 3 days and told Jake repeatedly how happy she was for him. She also warned him that Earth would expect him to serve as an unofficial ambassador between humanity and the Etherean Empire. Jake accepted this responsibility, knowing that his simple act of kindness 22 years ago had created obligations and opportunities that extended far beyond his personal life. But the happiness of the wedding could not last forever. The political situation in Etherean space was growing worse. With Jake's bonding complete, Sienna and Lyra's claim to the throne was now fully legitimate according to Etherean law. But the rival faction was preparing for war. They refused to accept the sisters' return and were gathering military forces to challenge them directly. Within a month of the wedding, intelligence reports confirmed that a major conflict was inevitable. Jake found himself thrust into a role he never expected. He was now the consort to 2 princesses in the middle of a civil war. Sienna immediately put his practical skills to use. She valued his human perspective on problems because he thought differently than Ethereans. Jake suggested tactics and strategies from human military history that Etherean commanders had never considered. Concepts like guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, and unconventional thinking were new to them. Ethereans had fought wars the same way for thousands of years. Jake's fresh approach helped them adapt. Lyra used Jake's emotional intelligence in diplomatic missions. Many neutral Etherean houses were tired of war and political games. Jake's honest and straightforward way of speaking appealed to them. He did not use fancy words or hidden meanings. He simply told the truth and asked for their support in building a better future. His genuine nature and his remarkable story of raising the princesses won over several important families who pledged their loyalty to Sienna and Lyra's cause. Over the next 6 months, their faction grew stronger. More houses joined them. More ships added to their fleet. The rival faction began losing ground. Jake worked alongside Sienna on military planning and beside Lyra on diplomatic efforts. He learned more about galactic politics in those months than he had learned in his entire previous life. He also discovered that he was good at this. His years of solving practical problems as a cargo pilot translated surprisingly well to solving political and military problems as a consort. The decisive battle came when their fleet engaged the rebel forces in the Etherean home system. Jake stood on the bridge of the Celestial Dawn with Sienna and Lyra, watching the conflict unfold on holographic displays. The battle was fierce and terrible. Ships on both sides were damaged or destroyed. Jake contributed by coordinating communications between allied vessels, using techniques he had developed during his cargo piloting days. When the flagship's shields began failing, he worked with Etherean engineers to keep them operational, applying quick fixes and creative solutions that bought them precious time. The turning point came when the rebel commander's ship was disabled. Sienna prepared to demand their surrender, but Jake asked to speak first. He opened a communication channel to every ship in the system and spoke from his heart. He told them that enough blood had been spilled. He reminded them that they were all Ethereans and all part of the same empire. He explained that Sienna and Lyra had survived 22 years ago because someone chose compassion over convenience. They were offering that same compassion now: surrender and help rebuild, or continue fighting and everyone loses. Jake's speech was broadcast across the entire Etherean empire. It was a simple human message delivered with honesty and emotion. It worked. The rebel commander surrendered. Other rebel ships followed. The Civil War ended not with a final devastating battle, but with a choice to embrace peace. Etherian historians would later call it the most important speech in their civilization's history, delivered by a human who had simply said what needed to be said. 3 months later, Sienna and Lyra were crowned co-empresses of the Etherian Third Crown. The coronation was even more elaborate than the wedding. Jake stood beside them, now officially recognized as Emperor Consort. He wore ceremonial robes and a crown that felt too heavy on his head. But titles and crowns meant less to him than the quiet moments afterward, when the three of them sat together in their private chambers, eating terrible pancakes that Jake still could not make properly, and laughing about how far they had come from that first day in the damaged escape pod. Earth joined the galactic community through treaties and agreements negotiated with Jake's help. Humanity gained access to advanced technology and knowledge. Trade routes opened. Cultural exchanges began. Human students studied on alien worlds while alien students came to Earth. Jake became the bridge between civilizations, the living proof that compassion and kindness could change the galaxy. Years passed in their new life. Jake adapted to being an emperor, though he never quite got comfortable with the title. He preferred to work on practical problems, helping design better ships and systems using combined human and Etherian knowledge. Sienna ruled with wisdom and innovation, constantly improving their empire. Lyra used her empathic abilities to maintain peace and understanding among their people. Together, they built a government based on the values Jake had taught them: compassion, fairness, and practical common sense. They never forgot their Sunday morning tradition. No matter where in the galaxy they were, no matter what crisis demanded their attention, they always made time for pancakes together. The pancakes never got better. Jake remained a terrible cook. But they laughed every time, remembering simpler days in a small habitat on Luna 7 when they were just a family trying to figure things out together. Those moments reminded them of what really mattered. Not power or politics or prestige, but love and connection and choosing to care for each other every single day.